Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Carmel Mall with Writing for Peace. I'm here with longtime board member, journalist, author, and teacher, Brad Wetzler. And we're welcoming tonight Dinty W. Moore. I'm going to go ahead and read his short bio here for those of you who aren't already very familiar with Dinty. Dinty W. Moore is author of the award-winning memoir, Between Panic and Desire. The writing guides The Story Cure and Crafting the Personal Essay, and 2 books centered on his spiritual journey, The Accidental Buddhist and The Mindful Writer. He has published essays and stories in the Georgia Review, Harper's, the New York Times Magazine, the Southern Review, and elsewhere. He is founding editor of Brevity.com, the journal of flash nonfiction, and teaches master classes and workshops across the United States, as well as in Ireland, Scotland, Spain, Switzerland, and Mexico. You can learn more about Dinty on his website at www.dintywmore.com. And I'm really excited because I love this book. Dinty's going to be reading today from The Mindful Writer. Welcome, Dinty.
I hope it's more of a discussion than a reading, though I am going to begin, as you do, at a reading by reading a little bit. I've taken what is in the book and kind of retooled it slightly, so I think it works better as an oral presentation. But I will be reading, and I'm going to read a bit of the introductory material, which will take the place of explaining what the book is, because I explain it pretty well here, I hope. And then at various points we'll stop, and if anybody wants to weigh in with a question or an observation or just a wave, we'll have time for that. And Carmel will help us with that too, I believe. So here's a bit from the book, The Mindful Writer. I'd like to start with a quote from the novelist and memoirist Harry Crews. Writers spend all their time preoccupied with just the things that their fellow men and women spend their time trying to avoid thinking about. It takes great courage to look where you have to look, which is in yourself, in your experience, in your relationship with fellow beings, your relationship to the earth, to the spirit, or to the first cause, to look at them and make something of them. I met Crews when he was alive, and he was, to the best of my knowledge, not a Buddhist, or at least he didn't identify as a Buddhist. But he sums up the meaning of Buddhist mindfulness very well in that quote. And he makes my point for me as well. It is the writer's job to look where you have to look. In yourself, in your experience, in your relationship with fellow beings, your relationship to the earth, to look at them and make something of them. Or as the brilliant poet Mary Oliver puts it much more succinctly, to pay attention. This is our endless and proper work. The truth is that the practice of seeing sharply and authentically, feeling what is honestly there to be felt, opening ourselves to emotions and experiences we might otherwise avoid, is part of every art form. Artists, painters, actors, dancers, musical composers have their own concerns and terminology, but they know very well that exploration and discovery are necessary if you want to make art. A final advantage of deliberate mindfulness is that it can help you to concentrate on your work, a true challenge in our modern digital, pandemic-ravaged world. Being mindful of what distracts you, of what leads you to walk away from your writing desk, of the inner voice that chides, "Don't bother, the work isn't good enough," is the first step to turning off those distractions and getting work done. I wrote a book many years ago, The Accidental Buddhist, a memoir exploring my potholed attempts to embrace the Buddhist practice and philosophy and meld it with a typically busy, overindulged modern lifestyle. Because of that book, I am often asked to explain how the Dharma, how Buddhist teachings have influenced my writing. Despite the frequency of the question, I regularly find myself unable to provide anything like a satisfying answer. I knew that the Buddha's core teachings had seeped deep into my life, in ways that I had not originally anticipated. But I could not honestly say that my writing habits had changed as a result, or that I had taken on a Buddhist approach to the highly deliberate routine of choosing words, composing sentences, and accumulating pages. My work, it seemed, went on as it always had, ploddingly, unevenly, and with consistent difficulty. Yet the question, "You are a Buddhist, so can you tell me how your Buddhism affects your writing?" came again and again, and still no good answer. And then one day it occurred to me, my inability to articulate a satisfying reply might mean that I was in fact trying all along to answer the wrong question. It was not Buddhism that had influenced my writing, but quite the opposite. The river of influence ran the other way. Rather than seeing mindfulness and Buddhism as shaping my efforts on the page, what I've come to understand is that my lifelong pursuit of writing and creativity helped to open me up to the path of Buddhism. The innumerable lessons learned in struggling with my writing over the years had made me aware, albeit in an unconscious, inarticulate way, of the simple wisdom of mindfulness and non-attachment presented in the Buddha's Four Noble Truths. If you don't know them, they go like this. Life is full of discontent, the Buddha told us. And that discontent comes about due to our grasping at things, our craving and clinging, our insistence that things be a certain way. There is, however, a way to make the inescapability of this discontent less problematic in our lives. The path is through right action, right speech, right livelihood, through living a deliberate and intentional life in service to the good of all living beings. As a writer, I had learned these lessons. The power of releasing my control of story, of letting the words or the characters or the images, the mysterious underpinnings of a piece of prose take me in unexpected directions. The less I grasped at and choked my writing, the more it seemed to expand into areas that surprised and pleased not just me, but the reader as well. I had seen as well how my ego and desires would inevitably lead toward writer's block and self-loathing. How worrying about critical responses or negative reactions would eventually dry up whatever creative flow I had managed to bring forth. I had come to understand the importance of examining my motives for writing, of rooting out insincerity. Dishonest motives, such as writing to get back at someone who you think wronged you, or pretending to be more decent or devout on the page than you are in real life, is as dangerous to a writer as just about anything that I can think of. These lessons had already been learned and relearned many times over in my writing. So when I first encountered the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, they seemed familiar and somehow already true. None of this is easy, of course. The deeper practice of intentional living and mindfulness remains an ongoing effort to be aware and awake. But at least I am not wondering if it all can work. I have seen with my own eyes, observed it directly in my daily task. So what is mindfulness? The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh has written and lectured often on the subject of mindfulness, and he remains one of my most revered teachers because his message is so beautifully simple. If you want to promote peace, be peaceful as you walk across the room. If you want to promote love, love yourself and those immediately around you. If you want to reach enlightenment, be entirely awake and in the moment, whether awash in an oceanfront sunrise or merely washing the dinner dishes. Mindfulness begins with an awareness of the simplest action. Breathing in, know that you are breathing in. Breathing out, know that you are breathing out. Washing the dishes, know that you are washing the dishes. Be there with the soap, the warm water, the silverware, not somewhere in your head miles or years away. In the context of writing, mindfulness means that at the moments when you are focusing on an elusive line of poetry or a stubborn plot obstacle or a story of any sort, you are able to remain attentive to the task at hand, seeing the words that are before you, hearing the possibilities in your mind, not succumbing to the thousands of other willing and ready distractions. More than that, mindfulness means being aware of why you want to write, why you are writing, who you are writing for, and how to balance your desire for recognition with the demands of clear-headedness and honesty. Finally, mindfulness includes a conscientious and thorough consideration of who you are as a writer, where you are in your life, what you are feeling, and what is inside of you that wants or needs to be written. Or to put it another way, consider the Four Noble Truths transposed into a writer's credo. The Four Noble Truths for writers. The writing life is difficult, full of disappointment and dissatisfaction. Much of this dissatisfaction comes from the ego, from our insistence on controlling both the process of writing and how the world reacts to what we have written. There is a way to lessen the disappointment and dissatisfaction and to live a more fruitful writing life. The way to accomplish this is to make both the practice of writing about the work. The way to accomplish this is to make both the practice of writing and the work itself less about ourselves. To thrive, we must be mindful of our motives and our attachments to desired outcomes. So that's a bit of the introduction. I already violated my one rule, which is I sound much more devout and together in that than I am in real life. That's the wonderful thing about writing, is you can shape it and people think for a minute that you're more articulate than you are. And then the book goes forward with some quotes from artists of all sorts and a couple of religious figures, which I sort of unpack and think more about mindfulness and the artistic process. But this is the point where I thought I'd stop and see if our host wanted to ask me a question, or if she wanted to turn to the audience, whatever seems right at this point.
My husband and I read The Accidental Buddhist together, and that was fun. The thing that really impressed us, I think, was that you approached it with such humility. And as you were just sort of exploring the journey, and you shared that with the reader in a way that was, we really were learning along with you. And, I think at that point, what year was that?
Oh, I don't think most of the people in the audience weren't born back then. I think it was 97, maybe 1997. It was a long time ago.
So Buddhism was just kind of emerging at that point as a really, I don't want to say trendy, not because that's not quite the right word, but
well, Buddhism had been alive in San Francisco. I mean, Buddhism in America. Obviously, yeah. Buddhism is, goes back.
No, I mean,
Buddhism in America had thrived in New York City,
yeah,
and San Francisco for years and years and years. But that was about the time that it was starting to show up in places like Iowa and West Virginia, and suburban Chicago, and places you didn't expect it.
And there were a lot of questions about it, and so your approach, which was kind of teaching us as you were learning it, was really, I think, useful. And now this book, The Mindful Writer, it's been 25, 30 years. How long has it been? Has it been that long? No, this is 20. So
if you told me I had to do math, I wouldn't. If you told me I had to do math, I never would have agreed to be here.
But so you've been practicing now for years, and that comes through. You're sharing sort of this accumulated wisdom through your own experience, but at the same time, there's still that humility, and I really appreciate that. That we all, are kind of coming from the same place in a lot of ways. And like you said, you're not coming at it from,
But anybody who tells you they're holier than thou,
yes,
don't trust them.
Yes, exactly.
That's what I believe.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate that. And the thing that I love about this book is, I can open it anywhere, and it's like it's just what I needed in that moment, just what I needed to read. So I hope you'll read some more. And are there any other questions that people had for Dinty at this point? I can't see everybody, so.
I have a question.
The young lady, yes.
Hey,
The young
Dinty.
lady with the red hair. What's your question?
Hey, Dinty. Yeah, I'm. Of course, I know the book well. I know all of your books quite well, and we've taught together, and been colleagues for a long time. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the role of humor in writing and the acceptance and the Buddhist stance on writing. Could you say something about that?
I mean, the role of humor in my writing is that I like to crack jokes, and one of the things, and that's a writing thing too, though. It's like I tried to keep that out of my writing for a long time. And we think we all do this. It's like, I want to be a writer. Oh, so I better sound like, you fill in the blank, somebody from the 17th century or some wonderful intellectual, or if that's you, if you're a wonderful intellectual, God love you. But I'm not a wonderful intellectual, and I'm not somebody from the 17th century. So part of my finding my groove as a writer was the day I realized, I'm just a normal schlub who likes to crack jokes. Do that and see if anybody wants to read it. I think humor and Buddhism fit very well together. I mean, it's a people argue whether it's a philosophy or a religion. I think it's just a practice, just a way of organizing your life, and it's about trying to find joy. And even if we can't see you, smile, and the minute you smile, you feel a little better. And that's the simplest teaching out there, but it's also a pretty powerful one. I'm going to read a little bit more from the book, and then we'll let anybody else weigh in who wishes to. I guess we'll let anybody in. I'm not the moderator. It's not up to me. We'll let the people the moderator likes weigh in. So each little chapter of this book, and most chapters are 300 pages, 300 words. It's a little book with little chapters, but each one begins with a quote. And this first one is from James Tate. When one is highly alert to language, then nearly everything begs to be a poem. When one is highly alert to language, then nearly everything begs to be a poem. I love that quote. Tate's suggestion inevitably reminds me of Kinshin, or Zen-style walking meditation. When I first began my exploration of Buddhist practice, I never found much value in the walking meditation sessions that I experienced inside a crowded meditation hall. I understood that standing up from the cushion and walking around the huge room was partially intended to relieve stress in the legs, to keep my feet from falling hopelessly asleep. But the kinhin always came too late for me, and instead of walking mindfully, I would end up stumbling around on tingly, uncertain limbs, focused entirely on not toppling into the person directly in front of me. There seemed nothing mindful or meditative or useful about it. But one warm June day, a Buddhist monk from the Soto Zen tradition suggested we take our walking meditation outside. And for the next 30 minutes, she led us along trails and grassy hills, past a weathered barn and some deep maroon hollyhocks. And as the old saying goes, over hill and dale. Like the flower petals themselves, the power of mindful walking opened clearly inside of me that day. Later, back in the hushed meditation chamber, I was focused as never before, but not on the usual silence. Instead, I heard the insistent bird calls outside the window, as if they were an unfamiliar language, as if I had suddenly landed on a distant planet full of delightful new aural sensations. But of course, it was the same planet, the one that I had been ignoring for 30 years. Tate tells us that an awareness of language helps us to see the poem in all things. But I would add that an awareness of all things, not just lush farmland in the early summer, but crowded city streets, jarring suburban shopping centers, Even those most unpleasant places, like airports, will open us up as writers and help us to see the story or poem or play or monologue or memoir in everything and everyone. I'd like to follow that up with a quote from the Vietnamese monk I mentioned earlier, Thich Nhat Hanh. Compassion is a verb. Compassion is a verb. Thich Nhat Hanh is not talking about writing here or about grammar. He is reminding us to lift our compassionate selves off the cushion, to step away from our daily meditation spot and attend to the soup kitchen, the hospice, and other needs of the world around us. But his reminder can be taken as writing advice as well. Compassion is indispensable for an author. The fiction writer or playwright, for instance, must struggle to inhabit her characters, to understand who they are, what they need, what they want, and the obstacles that often stymie our characters' lives. The journalist must endeavor to discern the honest patterns in human behavior and possible reasons for a given action. The memoirist faces a task similar to that of the novelist, though in this case, the characters are actual people, family members, for instance. It takes consummate compassion to inhabit the truth of our families, especially if that truth is a troubled one. Compassion has no room for blame, no need of right versus wrong. Compassion requires that we understand, even if we disagree. Here is a truism I regularly share with my writing students. No one wakes up in the morning and thinks, today I'm going to make an absolute mess of my life. Yet, this is what happens, time and again, to the people we know, to the people we hear about on the morning news shows, and to the people who populate the stories we write. It is our job as writers to imagine why human beings, often even those with the best intentions, seem consistently to create disarray, both personal and public. It is our job as well to understand that these failings could happen to anyone. Exercise the muscles that compassionately open the heart in your writing and in your life.
Hi, Dinty. It's Brad here. Thanks for reading tonight. And one of the things I love about your writing are your characters, and I appreciate that quote you just read about compassion as a verb, because I find you have a lot of compassion for your characters. And can you talk about? You also don't seem to feel the need to pigeonhole them and to actually over describe them. You sort of let them be. And can you talk a little bit about your characters and how you think about writing about other people who are real?
Yeah, and for people who haven't heard me say this before, I teach a lot of memoir, nonfiction writing. I still think of those people as characters because, if I'm writing about my mother, if I'm writing about my sister who may be on this call, I'm not sure. They're real. They're not people I've made up as if I'm writing a novel, but the reader has never met them. So they're characters. I have to create a living, breathing, moving person on the page, just like a novelist would out of whole fictional cloth, except I have to use what I have, what I think I know about the person, what I've observed, what makes sense to me. It's complicated, obviously. And I forget the question. Talk about my characters. I will say this. People are contradictions. Anytime I've actually felt that I was close, and it's hard enough to understand myself. But anytime I felt like I was close to understanding somebody else and what drives their engine day to day, it's almost always sort of a contradiction in their lives. It could be a tragic one, and that usually lends itself to unhappy people. But it could just be a mundane one, or a circumstantial one, or even in sometimes kind of a humorous, silly one. But it's the contradictions, the things that don't make sense in people's lives, but they do it anyway, that I think gets at their essence most sharply. So I'm always looking for those little moments where, they say one thing and do another thing. They believe this very strongly about themselves, yet everybody around them sees that the opposite is true. And I'm not only, and again, I'm not only talking about the dark manifestations or the dysfunctional or tragic manifestations. We do that all the time in silly ways too. We do that all the way, even in caring ways. People who, the most loving, caring, warm people, attempting to help their children, help their friends and partners, help their partners, at the same time do the stupidest, most inept things out of good intentions. That's the kind of thing that interests me when I'm trying to write in fiction, which I still do a little bit of, or when I'm writing my nonfiction.
Thank you. That's great. Any other questions from the audience tonight?
Well, then you're forced to listen to me again. I love this quote from Vita Sackville West. "It is necessary to write, if the days are not to slip emptily by. How else indeed to clap the net over the butterfly of the moment? For the moment passes, it is forgotten, the mood is gone, life itself is gone. That is where the writer scores over his fellows. He catches the changes of his mind on the hop." That's a fun quote. Why do we write? Yes, there are days that the answer might be as shallow as, "I want to see my name in the table of contents of the Paris Review," or "I want to be one of those smart people interviewed in a magazine and then show that magazine to my older sisters who always implied that I was too dim-witted to accomplish anything." But those reasons will not sustain a writer. Certainly not through the inevitable rejection, the agonizing dry spells, the stinging eyeballs, and tired brain cells that come halfway through a book project. We write to capture a bit of ourselves and a bit of the world that is floating and occasionally hurtling in incredible speed past the window of our lives. We write to clap the net over the butterfly, which is our very existence. Letting the days slip emptily by is as close to a definition of the opposite of mindfulness as I can imagine. We want to be the one who catches the changes of his mind on the hop by making writing a necessity, a fortunate itch that must be scratched. And I'm going to pair that tonight with a quote from Truman Capote. "To me, the greatest pleasure of writing is not what it's about, but the music the words make." And that is the other reason we write, because what results from our efforts is irresistible to us. "Do you think I can be a writer?" students will sometimes ask me. They think they are asking about innate talent or raw intelligence, or whether they exhibit a sufficient amount of noteworthy thought and insight. My answer is always much simpler than that, however. "I don't know," I say to them. "Do you enjoy playing with words?" It is the very texture of language, the primal clay of verbs, nouns, sentences, the tactile sensation of combining those words into a poem or story, that in the end will bring a writer her most satisfaction. Glory and recognition are fleeting, but to love what you do in the moment that you are doing it, that is an incomparable gift.
Dinty, I think
question in the chat there.
questions in the comment section. I think can you see the comment section?
I'm going to click on something and then I can.
I'll read one of them too. What do you think about writing now in our political climate in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, I mean, it's the same as always. I mean, I think there's certainly people who are writing to the specific political moment. I mean, all the anger between the two sides, the changes that will come if one side wins the next election or the other side wins the next election, the distrust and chaos. There's people who are writing directly to that, and they need to, and we need people to do that. There's people who are writing about this pandemic, which is unprecedented, and years from now, people are going to want to know and remember and catch the butterfly of the moment, what it felt like And then there's a need to just write about other things, to write about the things we've always written about. So I don't know if I'm ducking the question, but I don't know that. I mean, I think these times are stressful, right? I think we all feel that. Both the political and the virus climate and the fires out west and all the things that are going on, and the fact that many of us can't see our loved ones other than on this funny screen. I mean, all of that is contributing to a whole lot of stress. But I still want to read stories about regular people and what they do and what they feel and how they negotiate, the small things in life. I don't want to just read about, God forbid, just read about politics all the time. I see my nephew out there. I'm going to wave at him. I'm not going to tell you which one he is. Well, he just waved back, so some of you might have figured it out. Hi, Adam.
Here's another question from Gavin Powers. Says, my teenager is so inspired listening to you. He would like to know, what is the one piece of advice you'd give to aspiring writers?
Put me on the spot. Gavin's teenage son, I guess. I think the best piece of advice I can give is that your first attempts to write, even though you're filled with excitement, are going to be lousy, or maybe they'll feel good, but you'll look at them a week later and go, it's not as good as I thought it was. And don't let that discourage you. That everybody feels that at the beginning. You keep at it like you would learning to play tennis or learning any skill, learning to cook. You just keep at it, get a little bit better at it every week, every month. And about a year later, you look up and you go, boy, I've learned a lot. I'm a lot better at this than I used to be. And frankly, even then you're going to write some things and you're going to look at them and go, oh, I wanted this to be brilliant. And it looks kind of flat and stupid. Well, most of my first drafts, even now, and I've been at this for many, many, many years, even most of my first drafts look kind of flat and stupid. And the answer is to sort of dive in there and try to fix it. Nobody sees anything I've written until I've written about 4 or 5 drafts. So at least I have a fighting chance of knowing what I'm trying to say. So that was 2 pieces of advice. Don't be discouraged when your early efforts aren't as exciting or wonderful as you think they should be. They're not going to be. And stubbornness and persistence. And that's really good advice for anybody and anything they want to do. You want to start a small business. You want to raise children. You want to learn a skill. You want to write. Just be stubborn. It's like, I'm going to keep doing this till I get better. It's not. I mean, it's art, and there's some magical, wonderful things about art. But it's also just like, keep at it till you get better. And if you're not getting better, just go, I'm going to keep at it until I am.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about just living a creative life? You're one of the few who probably been able to, make income and make a living in your writing. But can you talk about living a creative life among all the responsibilities that most of us have, to have a job, to have family, and to find that space to be creative and to write?
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, to be honest, I feel incredibly fortunate to have written, as many books, and I've written more books than I've published. Some of them never got published because they weren't very good. I feel very fortunate to have written so many books that did get published, and to have an audience, and to be able to go to interesting places and talk to people once the airlines are up and flying again about writing. But I still spent my entire life as a college teacher. That's what paid the bills and brought me health insurance. There's not many artists who can live at that alone. Most all of us have a side gig. Mine was teaching, still is teaching. But that's different than an artistic life. An artistic life, I feel I'm having that feeling. Remember when I talked about the introduction about like anybody who pretends to be more devout or wonderful than they really are. I don't know. I try to absorb art. I try to be honest with myself about, what I'm writing and what I think of other people's writing. I try to look at paintings. I try to listen to music, but I don't know that I'm I look at other artists, and here's my answer, and I'm sorry I'm babbling a bit. I look at other artists and I think, oh, she has an artistic life. I have a friend, Rebecca, who I saw her do a Zoom thing for the Kenyon Review, and I was like, I spent the whole time looking at the wall, the bookshelves in her house, thinking, oh, she's the real thing, man. She has such a beautiful house, and everything's so classy and fine, and those books and those bookshelves, and I'm such a fraud. That's what I was thinking most of the time. 'Cause I've got this sort of like green screen thing back here in a really ugly room. It's an illusion, It's somebody make me stop. I think most artists think they're inadequate on some level, and I think most artists look at other people and think, oh, look how artistic that person is. They have the best paintings in their house. They can quote, the poems off the top of their tongue. And I see my inadequacies. So okay, I'm going to answer your question now, Brad. Living an artistic life is to see your inadequacies and live up to them honestly.
There's another question in the margins there. Can you describe
imposter syndrome? Marcy just said everything I was trying to say in many fewer words.
Can you describe how you personally use mindfulness techniques in your writing process? Asks Krista.
Both two main ways. One of them is when I am writing something, to just slow down and when I'm revising, like, read my work out loud and really try to hear what I've written, not what I want it to sound like, not that screaming little voice saying, is this good enough? Is this good enough? Is this good enough? Am I brilliant? Are people gonna, think good things about me? Just sort of like listen to my sentences and say, what are they saying? And then there's this point at which I realized I was writing good sentences. In other words, sentences that sounded really nice and they weren't really true. And I wasn't lying. I was just like prettying things up, gilding the lily. So in terms of what I'm writing, just sort of listening to it to see, well, what is that sentence saying? What is that paragraph saying? And then asking myself, well, is it just pretty? Does it just sound intelligent? Or is it actually, do I actually believe what it's saying? And then the other part of it, which I think I alluded to earlier, is like, as a writer, you've got all these distractions, and one of them is, am I going to get published? Is Ryder getting published in a better magazine than I am? Is Juniper getting a writing award and I'm not? And you can get caught up in writing for recognition, or writing because you're trying to prove something to your high school English teacher. And part of mindfulness is thinking, well, wait, if I'm going to do this, why do I really want to do this? It's not easy. So what am I really after here? So that's mindfulness too.
Yeah. Here's a question from Pat Schmidt. In your recent essay, you did a really provocative examination of looking out at the blades of grass, at the garden, at your neighbors, while also looking in and reflecting. It was quite meditative. Can you comment on that?
I wonder which essay she means. Was it my pandemic rant, maybe?
Yes, it was the pandemic rant.
Okay, and it was in psychology today.
Yeah.
Boy, I don't know that I'm very good at unpacking my own writing. I'll just say, and this sort of ties into the last question. So this was a one sentence rant where I sort of unleashed everything that was driving me crazy about being locked down in this pandemic, and how my neighbors were acting, and how what I saw as inconsistencies and that's too polite a word. I swore a lot and yelled at people and said, wear your damn mask and what's wrong with you and why are you buying all the toilet paper and stuff like that. But ultimately I realized I was being as foolish as they were. That's part, goes back to the whole thing about mindfulness, is I was trying to get at the bottom of the truth of all this, which is that it's driving me crazy, and it's probably driving other people crazy, and other people are acting ridiculous, with big quotation marks around it, because of all the stress, and that me judging them for acting ridiculous is just making me more stressed out, when in fact I'm acting ridiculous. So it's that sort of, I hope the piece I wrote is better than my explanation, but it comes back to that sort of like taking a deep breath and really looking at yourself and saying, do I want to talk about the contradictions and insincerity of other people? Do I want to figure out if I'm part of the same loop, which of course most of us are.
Dinty, Michael C. writes, how do you deal with the pull between wanting to be artistically pure and the pressures to sell or commodify your art?
I don't want to be artistically pure, Michael. I don't want to be artistically toxic, but I want to tell a good story. I want to entertain people on some level. Probably the purest of motives I have is I hope that things I write make people think about their own lives in interesting ways. When I read a wonderful piece of writing or see a wonderful film, and I'm walking away, or the next morning I'm still thinking about it, and suddenly I'm reflecting on the choices I've made. That's the power of art. I'd like to think my work does some of that, but I don't sit around and think about purity. Purity, I think, is one of those highfalutin standards that's going to give us, if I did, I'd have so much writer's block that I wouldn't write for years and years and years. The pressure to sell and commodify my art, since we're talking about Buddhism, which is all about no ego, here's a big contradiction. It's like, no, I want people to read my work. Maybe I'll get rich next week. I'm not getting rich from it. I've been fortunate. But, if you can do all this work, you want to have eyeballs on it. It feels nice to think that other people I don't know, somewhere are reading it and having a chuckle, or reading it and thinking, oh, he just said something I hadn't thought of. Or reading it and thinking, oh, that thing he's saying about himself or that other person, I'm kind of that way too. That's my motive. Is that commodification? Maybe, but I want eyeballs, and that's a little bit of ego. I think you have to have ego to be an artist. It's like, I sculpted this. I think it's worth your while to come into an art gallery and look at it for 10 minutes or 2 minutes. That's an act of ego. I wrote a song. I think you should spend 3 minutes and sit and listen to it. You have to have a little bit of ego to be an artist, but don't let it take over. Don't get carried away with it. So I'm the opposite of pure in that regard.
So we have about 15 minutes. Dinty, would you like to read a little bit more?
Yes, I would. Flannery O'Connor. I'm really, really sure that Flannery O'Connor did not identify as a Buddhist. She's a wonderful writer with a strong set of Catholic beliefs. But she wrote this: the writer operates at a peculiar crossroads where time and place and eternity somehow meet. His problem is to find that location. The writer operates at a peculiar crossroads where time and place and eternity somehow meet. His problem is to find that location. We know from her writings that Flannery O'Connor was deeply spiritual, identifying strongly with the Catholic tradition. Still, in my view, what she is talking about here is enlightenment. The Sanskrit word for enlightenment, bodhi, means awakened. My early forays into Buddhism included all of the common misconceptions, including the persistent idea that enlightenment is the final goal, and that once enlightenment was attained, the ethereal Buddhist would sit blissfully atop a mountain, perhaps glowing and smiling at the lesser beings trudging along the path below. That, of course, is utter nonsense. Enlightenment is of no use unless it is employed to better the world for all beings. And enlightenment, like any awakening, can come and go. Indeed, it can be very fleeting. Writers who struggle with a poem or story or essay for draft after draft may on occasion experience a smidgen of enlightenment. It is the moment that the perfect word or precise action by a character or the ideal phrasing of an idea is revealed to the writer. So often this ideal phrase or line of dialogue is more of a discovery than an invention. It is a flash, like the proverbial light bulb above the head depicted in cartoons. This flash of insight doesn't come from thinking, from intellect, or from reason. It comes instead from a more mysterious part of our awareness. For that moment, at least, it can seem as if time and place and eternity have somehow met. And for the writer, the problem is to find this particular crossroads, this peculiar crossroads, the ever-shifting location where the insight forms. And then once the story is finished, it is time to start anew, and the search begins again. That's really a fancy way of saying you write and write and write, and then something a happy accident happens on the page. You go, oh, wow, great, I'm keeping that. And then you write and write and write, and you're like, when's that going to happen again? I'm a firm believer that if you want 4 good pages, you should write about 10 pages, because 6 pages is going to be warming up the pencil, and it's material that you should probably leave on the cutting room floor. Allen Ginsberg, who did identify as a Buddhist, said, catch yourself thinking. Buddhists have this term monkey mind that portrays the restlessness of our brains, especially when we deliberately try to slow the brain down. If you have ever attempted to meditate, you know how this works. The brain is likely to go suddenly hyperactive, leaping from notion to notion, idea to idea, like a caffeine-fueled monkey swinging from tree to tree. Just when you think the mind's stream of thought has slowed down, that you can stop and lay a finger on a single notion, the monkey goes flying off to another tree, and then another. In meditation, the goal, eventually, after many years of gradual effort, is to find the truth that is beyond thought. A useful exercise along the way, however, is on occasion to just forget this whole no thought idea, which can be distracting itself, and instead intentionally focus on the chatter of the mind. Just watch and listen as it runs its course. It can be a fascinating exercise to take whatever insistent thought that pops up, be it serious or trivial, and let it swing on and on to as many trees and branches as it desires, until it, the distraction itself, is seemingly exhausted, run to the ground, out of steam. Ginsberg doesn't advise us to stop the monkey from his inevitable traveling, just to catch the moment, to pull out a single thought for an instant and really notice, to be mindfully aware of it. That thought, maybe it's the line of a poem, the beginning of a story.
Thank you, Dinty. I think we have time for one more question, and there's one here from Laura Mahal I think probably a lot of us can identify with. I'm having one of those self-doubt days today, though I placed 2 poems this week and made the quarterfinals for one of my short stories.
Congratulations.
In truth, my sadness has to do with losing a friend to cancer this week and RBG passing away today. So success seems to mean little when we are grieving. Any advice on how to balance the external life, the internal life, and grief in general, since this year feels full of sorrow and guilty joys?
Oof. I don't mean to make light of it, but that's above my pay grade. I mean, that's such heavy material. And I'm not a Buddhist monk. I'm not a religious teacher. I'm just a writer who's trying to figure Buddhism out and figure writing out. But I guess all I would say to Laura is, I mean, what little I've learned is feel the grief. You know, don't fight the grief. Don't say, oh, there's so much grief, I have to make it stop. I think it's healthier. I think it's healthier as a person. That's not my world to say, but I know it's healthier for a writer to just say, okay, I am feeling enormous grief at what happened this year or what happened earlier today. And I'm going to let myself sit with it for a while. Just like, okay, grief is uncomfortable, but it's actually much more uncomfortable when you fight it back. So sit with it, feel it.
Yeah, thank you, Dinty. Do we have any other comments or questions? Oh, okay. I just want to thank you, Dinty, so much for being here today. It's
Thank
been
you.
really wonderful, and it's given us a lot to think about, as your book does. It's if you guys haven't gotten it yet, it's definitely one to grab. I also want to say just a little piece of news here, that this will be my last time with Friday Live. So it means a lot to me to have you here, Dinty, for that reason. And I want to, Brad Wetzler, who's here and has been co-hosting, he'll be taking over and changing a little bit. So Brad, I wonder if you could just say a word about that. Do you mind?
Not at all. Thanks, Carmel, and thank you for your service with this organization and creating it and leading it and founding it and being it for so long. And so I'm grateful to take over this part of the organization, to lead these talks on every other Friday. I am going to make a few changes. One of the changes I'm going to make is move it to Sunday night. So we'll be starting a month from now. We're restarting these readings, and I'm in the process of reaching out to writers to be my guests. And if any of you out there have books coming out and aspire to be a guest, I'd love to hear it. I'd also love to hear if you have ideas for people who might be a good fit for this format. And I would love to make this something that is meaningful to as many people as possible. So I'm just excited to be doing this, and I love I've been a writer for 30 years, and I just it's in my soul, and I love talking to writers and hearing about their process and hearing how they make sense of the world. So it's been a joy to have Dinty here tonight, and I just look forward to carrying the torch forward for you, Carmel, and so I'm grateful for all of this. So thank you. I'll write my email address in the comments if anyone has any thoughts about what they'd like to see going forward. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Brad. That's a great idea. And so for people who are celebrating today, I'd like to wish you a happy new year. And I am very hopeful, as we all are, that the new year will be happier than this year has been. Laura, thinking of you during this difficult time. Dinty, thank you so much for being here today. And we look forward to seeing other new things that you're doing, and all of you. I hope you'll keep in touch. So,
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
good night, everybody. Thank you.